In this podcast, two Gen Xers are taking a trip down memory lane, revisiting and reflecting on the cinema of the 1980s. We'll look at the hits and the flops, the studio blockbusters and art house indies, the critically acclaimed, and the universally reviled. The series is hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli, a writer and librarian, and features Dustin Morrow, a filmmaker, author, and professor of film. So pull on your legwarmers, crank up your boombox, and hop in the DeLorean. It's time for the Long Rewind. Welcome to the Long Rewind. I'm your host, Lisa, and with me as always is Dustin. Hi, Dustin.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, and we're here today to talk to you about the films of the first half of 1985, that is January through June of 1985.
All right, let's get into it. Tell us what was going on in the world in 1985.
Okay, so here's the world news for 1985. Mikhail Gorbachev becomes the Soviet Union leader. His leadership marked the beginning of a series of reforms known as perestroika and glasnost, aimed at modernizing the Soviet Union and increasing openness and transparency. In September, the wreckage of the RMS Titanic was discovered by a joint American-French expedition led by Robert Ballard. That would certainly become a big deal for a film.
Isn't it amazing that it took, what was it, 1912 that
Yeah,
sunk?
that sounds right.
So it took till 85, so
it's a long
73
time.
years to find the Titanic. It's such a big shift. It's wild that with all the technology we had, that it took that long.
Yeah, well, maybe the technology was just right in 1985. I don't know. The Iran-Contra scandal came to light in 1985, which involved the covert sale of weapons to Iran despite an arms embargo with the intention of securing the release of American hostages in Lebanon. The proceeds from these sales were then used to fund anti-Sandinista rebels in Nicaragua, which was in violation of U.S. law.
I remember these hearings being on television all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oliver North, right?
Oliver North, yeah. And as a little kid, had absolutely no idea what was going on and no interest in it. All I knew is that they kept preempting the TV shows I like to watch. Like, hey, man, where's Mr. Belvedere? Like, who is this guy who's droning on about whatever he's talking about?
The priorities of children. Yeah, that's kind of how I remember it, too. I remember Oliver North. I remember not really knowing what was happening. And now we know. Microsoft released the first version of its graphical operating system, Windows 1.0, in November, if you can believe that.
Yeah, the birth of Windows.
Back in 1985. The first ever WrestleMania, a professional wrestling event organized by the World Wrestling Federation, took place in March.
So you had a brother who was like a year younger than you. Was he into wrestling? I'm guessing as a little girl you were not into wrestling.
No,
but was he into wrestling?
I think to some degree. I think he must have watched it. I don't remember him being like super into it, but I think he must have watched it. I remember there was a boy down the street, a neighbor boy that we used to play with who was like super into it.
I used to watch, do you remember the cartoon Hulk Hogan's Rock and Roll Wrestling?
Yeah, I remember he had a cartoon. I don't remember the cartoon that well.
It was all those guys, Captain Lou Albano and Roddy Piper and the Iron Sheik and all those, those guys. Yeah. Do you remember the music video for the Goonies?
Kind of,
Cyndi Lauper. Actually, she made a few videos with professional wrestlers. And she showed up in WrestleMania, I think, a couple times.
She did?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I think she performed there or was a ringmaster or something. She was kind of weirdly
they had this interesting
embedded
crossover.
In professional wrestling in the beginning. I
wonder why that is. I wonder how that came about. I'd be interested to know that story.
I mean, I was very briefly into it as a real little kid when that cartoon was on. I thought Hulk Hogan was cool. I thought he was cool in Rocky 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and I also distinctly remember my dad telling me it was fake and having my mind just blown out of my pants.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, I think even though I wasn't into it, obviously WrestleMania was a huge part of pop culture at the time. So, I knew all the names of the people and I had seen it. And I don't remember who told me that, but I do remember that moment too of being told it was
I think
theater,
WrestleMania is the first or one of the first big pay-per-view
Really?
When pay-per-view came about. Yeah, it would always be WrestleMania for like $150 or some insane amount of money, especially for that era.
Yeah, no kidding. So it wasn't boxing? That's so surprising.
I'm sure it was boxing. I mean, I'm not speaking with any authority here. I don't actually know what the first pay-per-view stuff was, but I remember as a kid seeing commercials for pay-per-view, and they were always for WrestleMania. Like I just associated the two things because that's all I ever heard about in terms of pay-per-view was WrestleMania.
Yeah, it would have stood out to you, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay, what else is going on?
Well, Madonna's album Like a Virgin was released in November, but gained immense popularity and cultural impact in 1985.
So you mean November 84?
Yeah, I guess for whatever reason my notes leave out the 1984 part.
85 was kind of, I mean, Madonna was her first album, so Like a Virgin was her second album. Mm-hmm. Her first album was big, had a bunch of hits on it, but Like a Virgin was kind of like the big...
Yeah, the breakout.
It was the big album, and 85 was the big year of Madonna, for sure.
Yeah.
Like we'll talk about a couple movies that came out this year that had that Madonna was all over.
Well, and as a girl who was into clothes and girly things, Madonna had a huge impact on me and a lot of girls of the period. I mean, we would all wear those like lace headbands and all sorts of lace things. I remember that.
So as a kid, I of course had no idea what a virgin was, but I remember buying that cassette at a drugstore of all things.
Oh yeah.
And I remember my mom seeing me buying it and being like, "What? What is that?" To her credit, she did let me buy it. She also raised an eyebrow, I remember, at Raising Hell, the Run DMC. The Run DMC
Was that just
album.
because it was called Raising Hell, or was it one of those explicit
because it was
lyrics?
called Raising Hell. I think because it had hell in it.
Okay.
You know, my mom was a good Midwestern lady.
Well, sure. I mean, my parents definitely would have raised an eyebrow at that for sure. Also in music news, the charity single We Are the World was recorded in January 1985 by a supergroup of popular musicians known as USA for Africa. The song was released with the aim of raising funds for famine relief in Africa.
That was such a big deal.
Yeah.
And it's so funny to look back on it now because it's really not a good song. It's better than Do They Know It's Christmas?
That's interesting.
But not much better.
I wonder how that's probably one of those divisive things where some people, if they thought about it at all, like which one do they think is better? Yeah. It's interesting.
People love 80s music today, even young people that weren't alive when the 80s were around, but nobody is still listening to We Are the World. Like that never makes it into the compilations or the like streaming channels or the Sirius radio. You don't ever hear We Are the World.
But you do hear Do They Know It's Christmas at Christmas time? Like it or not.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, Christmas, like they'll trot out any old horrible thing. Yeah. I mean, Christmas music is a lot of Christmas music is some of the worst music ever. Yeah.
And some of the best. But yeah, my memory of We Are the World, apart from it just being everywhere, was, I don't know what, well, I guess if it was 1985, I'm not immediate. I think I was like in second grade or something. And our school did a fundraiser that involved We Are the World. And we all had these little We Are the World t-shirts. They were white and it said We Are the World in red. And there was like a circle around it. Very simple t-shirts. I kind of wish I still had it. And we all had to, collect pennies and, things like that. We were all collecting money. And then we had this concert where all the kids got up on the risers and sang We Are the World.
I weirdly have, we didn't do any organized thing, but I have vague memories of singing this song in music class too. Yeah. Maybe one of my my childhood classmates could confirm this for me. But I just have this weird memory of being made to sing.
Yeah, I wonder if a lot of people from the 80s have that. A lot of kids from the 80s. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of a boon to music teachers. It's fairly easy to sing and probably pretty easy to teach kids to sing. Plus, it involves so many of our favorite pop stars that.
That reminds me of. Did you guys participate in Hands Across America?
I don't think.
Do you remember what year that was? Maybe you were too young.
I thought that was 80s also.
It was 80s, but it might have been like really early 80s.
I don't know. I don't think that we did.
I don't remember either.
That had a song
While you're reading the news, I'm going to Google it.
Okay. Well, moving on beyond music, we've got the beloved comic strip Calvin and Hobbes by Bill Watterson. made its debut in November of 1985. The strip followed the adventures of a young boy named Calvin and his anthropomorphic tiger friend, Hobbs. Many of us have very fond memories of Calvin and Hobbes. I know those collection books of Calvin and Hobbes comics were just super popular with my friends, and I'm betting you probably owned a couple of them. I definitely owned one Calvin and Hobbes. I didn't.
I wasn't into Calvin and Hobbes. I had every Far Side compilation book.
That was the other.
Oh my God, I loved the Far Side. Was great. And I had classmates that were really into Garfield. Do you remember those Garfield books that were small and rectangle?
Yeah.
Like, those were everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, the video game Super Mario Brothers was released by Nintendo. The game introduced the iconic character Mario and his brother Luigi, becoming the flagship title from Nintendo and is, as we all may know, huge even to this day. So,
did you guys have a Nintendo?
Eventually we did. Again, this was my brother's, I wasn't really ever into video games. We did eventually get a Nintendo, and I know we had, Super Mario or maybe it was just Mario. I forget the difference. But anyway, we had Mario and we had Duck Hunt like a lot of people did at first. And my brothers sort of graduated beyond that at some point, but we did have it. Not in 85.
Yeah, I remember playing Duck Hunt at a friend's house. I never had Nintendo. Ours was an Atari house.
Yeah.
I had dozens and dozens of Atari games. We had it we had that well before Nintendo came around. I think maybe I was just not as into video games by the time Nintendo came around, or I had so many Atari games. Maybe it was just like, I don't know. For whatever reason, I don't remember even
maybe your
really
parents
wanting
were just
one.
like, this is all, you just didn't even want it.
But I love Atari. As you know, I still have my Atari. I still have all my Atari games. I have books about Atari.
Yeah, there's one sitting to the left of me right now. I can see an Atari.
So I looked it up. Hands Across America was 1986.
Oh, so it came after this. Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't participate in it at my school either. For people that weren't around in the 80s, which, is probably not many listening to this podcast. But anyway, if you don't know, it was this, I guess it was for charity. It was some kind of charity event.
I forget what charity that was.
The idea was that we were all going to join hands and create one line of people holding hands all across the United States. I mean, I'm sure that couldn't possibly have worked given the geography of the United States anyway, even if we wanted to.
Right.
But, it was an interesting idea. What I'm seeing here, though, is surprising me because I have no memory of this at all, is that there was a song.
Oh, I remember the song.
Associated with Hands Across America. It was by Toto.
I didn't know it was by Toto, but I do remember. I can hear it in my head.
Really? How did it go?
Well, it went like, hands across America, hands across this land I love, or something like that. That's the little bit I can kind of remember. I might be a little bit wrong. Hopefully I am a little wrong there, but
sounds like you're making this up.
I'm not. I mean, well, that's what I remember. As how accurate it is,
if you had asked me to make up a song called Hands Across America, I would sing exactly what you just sang.
Well, perhaps my memory for music is pretty decent.
I know. I'm not doubting you.
But it might also be wrong.
It doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound any better than Do They Know It's Christmas or We Are the World.
It was about the same level of song. Yeah.
Somebody should put together a compilation album of all those terrible celebrity charity singles.
I wonder how many there are.
There was a big one during the Desert Storm called Voices That Care.
That's right.
Which came out like around the time that I got my driver's license. And so I remember driving to school every day and they played Voices That Care. Yeah. And they played Winds of Change by the Scorpions. Those were and Land of Confusion by Genesis, which was a re-release of an older song. Those were the three songs I heard every day going to school.
Yeah. Well,
I think I told you about this before, but that was a weird thing too. Over Winds of Change, they cut in all these audio messages from people in the States to the troops over in Iraq. And
why didn't they do it over Voices That Care? Why Winds of Change, which is about like the USSR?
Well, maybe because Winds of Change has a bunch of really long whistling solos. Do you remember?
That's when, oh, I see. That's when they would read it was over the.
And you would hear, I sent you some cookies.
Oh.
I made some brownies for you.
I mean, that's nice.
It was nice, but it was just very.
It would just be
all the time. It was almost unbearably corny. It was an unbearably corny thing to have to listen to at 7:00 in the morning on the way to school in a snowstorm.
It's It's just an odd song for them to choose now that I think about it.
Anyway. All right. So movie news in 1985. I was surprised to find this because, there's so many great movies that came out in 1985. It's another great year for film. But it was considered kind of a generally unsuccessful year for film because the box office was down almost 20% compared to 1984. And the general consensus was that this was because we were getting too many sequels, too many movies that were too similar, which is certainly the case. We'll talk about that as we get into the films that came out that year. I mean, not because they weren't also really good, but that perhaps there just wasn't enough originality circling around in 85. But for whatever reason, the box office was down. Also, like, if you listen to our 1984 episode, you know what came out that year. Of course, it would have to be down. I mean, it's coming out on the heels of the Ghostbusters and just like there were so many huge films in 1984, like massive successes. It was a year for, science fiction continued kind of its reign and fantasy films, but they started to sort of flag at the box office for the first time. People were blaming Spielberg at the time, apparently, who created this sort of successful template for science fiction and fantasy movies with stuff like E.T. and Close Encounters. But, that's kind of dumb, like blaming somebody for stuff that ripped him off. But there you have it. There was a big saturation of youth-oriented movies targeted at people under 18. They were, they tended to make money until this year when I think there were maybe just too many of them and they were too similar. So there were some surprise successes, and they were movies that kind of went against that grain. So it was stuff like Cocoon, which was obviously a film where the average age of the cast was, in their 70s. I think the marketing also apparently was very similar for these movies. So it was hard for audiences to tell them apart and therefore to sort of know what movies they really wanted to go to. But anyway, let's get into it. Key films from the first half of 1985. Cocoon was one, just because it was kind of a surprise hit.
Yep.
It's a Ron Howard movie about aliens, and they it's almost too complicated to explain, but it's very charming.
I mean, there's also science fiction in that, to be fair, but it's not.
And it has a great
really
cast of kind of older actors,
wonderful
Jessica
cast.
Tandy and Wilfred Brimley and Don Amici and Hume Cronin.
It's a delight. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really fun movie worth seeing if you haven't seen it. You don't hear it talked about that much anymore, but it's an early Ron Howard movie, and it's very good. A couple of big sequels, Rambo: First Blood Part 2, which was a wildly different movie in tone from the First Blood.
I mean, that's the film where you really start to get the Rambo icon avatar, right? That's the Rambo that you think of, I think, is Rambo Part 2, right?
Which is why I think if you show people who haven't seen First Blood, the first one, if they watch it now, they're like, oh, this is not at all what I thought Rambo was. And then you're like, well, just see all the sequels, because the sequels were all a very different beast from the original, which was kind of a really serious movie, survival thriller set in the Pacific Northwest about a guy who has serious PTSD from the Vietnam War. And the other ones were sort of just very Reagan era, jingoistic, rah-rah America kind of things. Like Rambo: First Blood Part 2, he goes back into Vietnam to save POWs, which was almost a subgenre in the 80s. Like I think we've mentioned this in past episodes. A movie called Uncommon Valor with Gene Hackman. There was Missing in Action with Chuck Norris. Yeah. POW: The Escape with David Carradine. There were a bunch of these things. And it was, I think, like, it was just a very Reagan thing, like this idea that we could almost relitigate the Vietnam War and like win this time. I think Rambo even says in First Blood Part 2, like, do we get to win this time? I think that's a line from that movie.
Wow.
So yeah, it's it's a different thing.
Well, and you can even see it in the look of Rambo. It's the headband, super muscled, sly Stallone instead of.
Whereas in the first one, he looks like a homeless guy. Really,
or he's a bit scruffy.
Yeah.
I hadn't really seen the Rambo films till sometime in the last 5 to 7 years, and I remember, I saw, First Blood, and I thought, oh wow, this is not what I thought it was at all, because I was thinking of the Rambo from part 2.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Yeah. The other sequel that was kind of high profile that year, but less successful, was the last of Roger Moore's James Bond movies, which is A View to a Kill.
Yep.
Which is generally regarded as not a very good James Bond movie, although I find it completely delightful because I like my James Bond a little cartoony and goofy, and that movie is really goofy.
There's a lot of goofy fun in that movie.
Yeah. It's the one with Christopher Walken and
who's amazing.
Grace
and Grace Jones,
and Tanya Roberts, and a big finale on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
Same where they're fighting on the top of the Golden Gate Bridge. It's a lot of fun. Great theme song by Duran Duran.
Yeah, wonderful theme song.
We'll do an episode on James Bond in the 80s, and we'll talk about it more then.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the key films you noted?
Well, just like you were maybe saying in the movie news portion, I've noticed a lot of like teen movies, right? Like The Breakfast Club. Girls Just Want to Have Fun. I don't know if you'd call The Goonies a teen movie.
Totally.
But yeah, the Goonies. Tween.
But they're teens in that. Josh Brolin, Cary Green, Martha Plimpton, they're teens.
Same with St. Elmo's Fire. That's slightly beyond teen, but I don't know. I saw those all as like, those are all key, at least as far as I could tell, and definitely have that vibe.
Yeah. So I believe this is the year of the Brat Pack article that came out.
Oh, is that right?
And the labeling of the Brat
them.
Pack, which was essentially the cast of St. Elmo's Fire and Breakfast Club. Yeah. So Judd Nelson and Emilio Estevez and Andrew McCarthy. Mm-hmm. And it was perceived as having done a lot of harm to the careers of all of those guys.
Oh, is that right?
In impeding them from moving on to do more mature, serious roles. They obviously all went on to have careers, but I've heard interviews with almost all of them. Emilio Estevez is the only one that never seems to ever talk about it. But I've heard, like Rob Lowe in his podcast talks about coming to terms with that Brat Pack label and what it did to his career. And I've heard Andrew McCarthy wrote a book about it and made a documentary.
What about Robert Downey Jr.? Because he obviously reinvented himself pretty well in the last.
I don't think he was ever lumped into that group.
Oh, no?
Because he came along.
I guess I thought he was.
He kind of came along. He kind of hit fame a little later than those guys.
Yeah, that's true.
He was sort of playing like villains in Weird Science. Mm-hmm. Like he was kind of a second banana guy.
Okay.
At that
I was kind of misplacing him. All right. Yeah.
But those are, those are good movies. St. Elmo's Fire is not a great movie, but it's a fun 80s movie.
It's an
Breakfast
80s
Club,
touchstone,
of course, is a stone cold classic that holds up to this day.
Definitely. Yeah.
Here were some of the other teen movies of this year. There were indeed a ton of them.
Yeah.
The Sure Thing.
Oh, yeah. I had that on my list too.
Rob Reiner's incredibly charming comedy riff on It Happened One Night with John Cusack and Daphne Zuniga.
Yes.
Very, very, very good movie.
Yeah, it is good.
Another movie that sort of got lost in the shuffle. It's not often mentioned among like the great 80s teen comedies, but it's totally
great.
High on that list. Mischief, which is a little known movie set in the 50s, full of like the greatest soundtrack you've ever heard, like better than American Graffiti even, I think. It's just wall to wall, like great 50s rock and roll classics. It's Doug McKeon, Catherine Mary Stewart, kind of a lesser known cast, although Kelly Preston is in it, has a very famous nude scene in it for what that's worth. But it's just a very charming kind of teen comedy set in the 50s. Vision Quest.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a sports movie about high school wrestling with Matthew Modine. Another great soundtrack. Just One of the Guys, which is kind of a Tootsie in reverse. It's a girl in high school who is not being taken seriously as a journalist, and so she goes undercover as a boy, and she turns out to kind of look exactly like Ralph Macchio. which, Karate Kid had come out the year earlier. So there's all this,
Never
like,
thought
there are
about it
even
that way.
references in the movie. Everybody's like, you look like Ralph Macchio.
Oh, that's funny.
So they got it. It's a pretty funny movie. Dumb, but fun. Secret Admirer, also dumb, but fun. C. Thomas Howell, Kelly Preston again, Lori Loughlin, about sort of mistaken identity as this like secret admirer letter gets passed around. Everybody thinks it's to them. Have you seen that movie?
No, I haven't seen Secret Admirer.
It's, it's not good, but it's fun.
It's a lesser known teen movie of that.
It was on HBO all the time.
Ah, that explains it.
The Last Dragon.
Oh, yeah, The Last Dragon.
Is Barry Gordy of Motown produced this martial arts movie, recognizing accurately that, old Hong Kong cinema kung fu movies were very, very popular in black neighborhoods. And so he essentially made this black kung fu movie.
Yep.
And it's full of music. It's full of like vanities in it at her like most coked up she ever was. The whole movie feels like it's like was born out of coke.
That's like one of the few things I remember from that movie is her like descending into her
nightclub.
Her nightclub.
Yeah, it's a crazy movie.
It is pretty crazy.
Full of like blank squares. It's a bizarre film. Gotcha.
Oh yeah, Gotcha. So
which was the second of the 80s movies about the game killer or assassin that was played on college campuses, which we talked about in another episode, I believe. Anthony Edwards basically plays the spy game on his campus in LA, and then when he goes to Europe, he gets embroiled in actual spy activities and is forced to rely on the skills that he gained from this game to get him out of it. It's really dumb and really fun.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good time.
Daryl.
Oh, yeah.
Which is more of a tween movie than a teen movie, but I would include it. It's about a kid who is essentially a robot, and he's an android, and he escapes from the plant or the facility where he was created. And gets lost and then gets put into foster care. Michael McKean plays his foster dad. Yeah. And it's this very sweet.
It is. I saw this recently for the first time and actually really enjoyed it. It was super
it's
lovely.
very much in that vein of
sweet.
like Explorers or Real Genius or those sort of like 80s teen and tween sci-fi science comedies. It's in that. It's in that thing. And then the last one I'll mention, nobody's ever heard of this movie. My sister likes this movie. The New Kids.
I was waiting for that one to come up.
Yeah,
I know that's a Morrow favorite.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's bad, but it's once you see it, you'll be like, I'm better for having saw that because that was crazy, and everybody deserves a little crazy in their life.
It's another Lori Loughlin movie.
It is Lori Loughlin. Yeah, it's directed by Sean Cunningham. It's one of his follow-up movies to Friday the 13th.
Oh.
So, but it is a horror film, kind of. It's like, it's about two kids that are orphaned, and then they go to live with their uncle in Florida. He runs a Santa Claus themed cut rate amusement park, which you have to see to believe.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the whole finale of the movie, they run up against a group of, for lack of a better word, like hillbillies, headed by
an
Spader? Extremely bizarre James Spader performance.
Yeah.
Really, really strange.
This is not Blaine from
James
Pretty in
Spader
Pink.
is doing something in this movie.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the big action finale takes place entirely in the Santa Claus theme park.
Of course.
And it's like, it's just wild. It's a wild movie.
Yeah.
What else did you note?
Well, let's see. I was just thinking, isn't Madonna a part of Vision Quest?
Yeah. So as we said, it was kind of the year of Madonna.
I was just about to say,
she did the Virgin tour this year, which was her first big worldwide tour.
Yeah.
This was the first year that teens really started to dress like her.
That's what I was saying before. Yeah, for sure. Even little girls like me wanted to dress like her.
Yeah, this was also the year, there was a big scandal that she had taken some nude photographs in before she became famous, and they were found and published, and there was kind of a legal fight over whether those were going to be published or not. I think Bob Guccione, the guy that published Penthouse, ended up buying them for like $1 zillion, and that story dominated the media for a long time. And then on top of all that, she had 2 big Hollywood movies.
Well, right. So that's what I was about to say. I have Desperately
Vision
Seeking
Quest is one.
Susan.
She's barely in that. She just plays a club singer.
Yeah.
But she had a hit, a couple hit songs come out of that, Gambler and Crazy for You, which is the one that you still hear.
Yeah.
And then Desperately Seeking.
Yeah, well, that's what I was about to say. I was thinking, we have Madonna and Vision Quest, and of course the Like a Virgin album, and we've also got Desperately Seeking Susan this year. So definitely the year of Madonna. That's a really fun movie that I think I didn't see it till I was an adult, and I don't think I realized it wasn't like only about Madonna. That it's
I mean, that was the thing too, that it was marketed as a Madonna movie,
Yeah.
and she's actually. She's a supporting player at best.
She's not the lead, but it's really fun. I really like it.
It's super fun. It's one of those. It's one of the quintessential like Greenwich Village movies,
I was going to say
even
that's
New York
one of the
movies
things I like
of
about
the
it.
80s.
Yeah.
It has a really great sense of New York City in the 80s.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really love about it. As someone who I grew up on Long Island, so I come from that area. It just gives you that like. Rosanna Arquette is a bridge and tunnel gal, and then she goes to the city. So, and I remember going to the city during this time. So just like seeing those 2 milieus is fun for me. And I love New York of the 80s. Yeah. So grungy though it was. Yeah.
It's a screwball comedy, basically.
Yeah.
It's a mistaken identity screwball comedy with
Amnesia's
great music
involved.
and just great character actors. And isn't Laurie Metcalf in it even?
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah. I'm pretty sure she is.
Yeah, just really great. Like everybody in it is great.
Really good.
And directed by Susan Seidelman. There weren't a lot of prominent women directors in the 80s, but she was one of them, and this is probably her best movie.
Yeah, it's a good one. So Year of Madonna, that was another thing that came up for me. I also had Fletch.
I love Fletch.
Yeah, me too.
I was a late comer to Fletch. I'm not sure. I must have seen it in the 80s, but I don't remember. I don't know. I came to love it later on. Yeah. And now I just love it.
I love it too. I mean, I think I saw it like maybe on VHS as a kid and didn't really totally get it, because it works on a few levels. So at least if you're a little kid. So, but I love it now. For sure.
It's Chevy Chase is an investigative journalist. It's based on a series of novels about Irwin Fletcher. That's the name of the character.
His name, right.
It was not remade, but rebooted some years ago with John Hamm as Fletch. They talked about rebooting it over the years. I think Jason, what's his name? The guy that was in all of the Kevin Smith movies.
Oh, Jason Mewes?
No, not Jason Mewes. The
I
other
didn't
one.
think so.
The guy from My Name Is Earl.
Jason Lee?
Jason Lee, yeah. He was going to play Fletch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it never got off the ground. But yeah, it's so intrinsically linked to Chevy. Yeah, it's just hard to imagine.
I mean, the reboot was...
Yeah, the John Hamm movie was surprisingly good, but it was a very different, less broad, less goofy version of
That's probably
Fletch.
smart, though, because who's going to be Chevy? You can't be Chevy.
Yeah.
So.
It's like peak Chevy. It's like,
it really is.
I think my holy trinity of Chevy is The First Vacation, Fletch, and Funny Farm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good trio for sure.
So I had some movies that were some sort of major works from major directors, I would call them, that came out this year. I couldn't figure out another way to sort of group them together, but that's how I'm going to do it. And those were Blood Simple, which was the first Coen Brothers movie.
Oh, yeah. I've never seen this.
Yeah, it's a moody noir. I think it's set in Texas. I haven't seen it in a long time, but Frances McDormand's in it. So she was there from the beginning. It's a good movie. Has this I remember this really like potently terrifying scene in a bathroom where he, like the villain, is trying to reach from one room outside in through another window to get at Frances McDormand. It's a scary scene.
This should probably go on my list of things to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pritzi's Honor,
which I also need to see.
directed by the great John Huston, his next to last movie, with Jack Nicholson and Kathleen Turner as rival hitmen, professional killers who fall in love and end up getting contracts on each other's lives. So they have to decide, as Nicholson says in the movie, I don't know, do I whack her? Do I marry her? Do I whack her? Do I marry her? That's what he keeps saying.
That's another one that needs to go on my to-see list.
Oh, you haven't seen that either?
I haven't seen Pritzi's Honor.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. Oscar winning. I think Angelica Houston won an Oscar for that movie. Purple Rose of Cairo. A super charming Woody Allen movie about a woman during the Depression who goes to the movies to escape, like so many people did, and falls in love with this matinee actor on the screen. And then one day he comes off the screen and they go out into the city of New York and have a little romance. It's a very cute, very charming movie. Considered one of Woody's better films of the 80s. Witness, which is a movie by the Australian director Peter Weir, where Harrison Ford goes into an Amish community to protect a little boy who's witnessed a murder in Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah.
Peter Weir is such an interesting filmmaker. He made so many different types of movies. He's one of those directors that really crossed all genres and did like Green Card, which was a romantic comedy. Yeah.
Very different.
Dead Poets Society.
Yeah.
Which is a drama. What else did he do? The Year of Living Dangerously, which is kind of an espionage thing.
Yeah, these
political
are all really
thriller.
different.
Picnic at Hanging Rock, which is this sort of elegiac mystery movie from Australia. Yeah. He's a very interesting filmmaker, made a lot of great stuff, and it was in wildly different genres, but they were all good.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of the ones I've seen are wonderful, and there's some I would really love to see that I haven't. It's good.
Brazil came out this year, the Terry Gilliam classic, which looks a lot like George Orwell's 1984.
Yeah,
that's what I always think of when I see it.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
I think it's kind of considered his masterpiece, but it would not. I'm not sure it would even be in my top 5. I just don't find it all that pleasant to watch.
It's not pleasant. No, it's definitely not pleasant, but I've always found
it's not one of my favorite Gilliam movies. Like if I'm going to watch Gilliam, I'd rather watch Time Bandits or The Fisher King or a Python thing or something.
That's fair.
Brazil is just such a
I appreciate its message. I think I've always appreciated its message. And
it's striking looking.
Oh, it's very striking looking.
It's just not a real...
It maybe be peak like Gilliam aesthetic. Aesthetically speaking, it's like... pure Gilliam.
Yeah.
But all his films are, I guess. So I don't know if you can really say that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then the last one I wanted to mention is Albert Brooks, a director I love, who made a really funny movie called Lost in America.
Yeah.
Which is another one of those sort of great, like if you're trying to explain the 80s to somebody, this is a good movie to show them because it's really about the death of the 1960s boomers ideas about free living,
dropping out,
and it's about a couple of yuppies who are boomers who decide in the 80s to drop out of society and travel America in a Winnebago, and it goes horribly wrong on the first night when the wife in this couple, their first stop is in Vegas, and she loses their entire nest egg. And so they have no money to drop out with, and they can't get their jobs back. And it just goes downhill from there. Very, very funny movie.
This is one of those movies I, again, came to pretty late. I saw it sometime in the last 5 to 10 years. And seeing it now is so interesting because there is a lot of like van life influencer culture out there, like people who want to do this now. There's some people who there was a period of time where people were sort of forced to do this. If you think of what movie am I thinking of that based Frances McDormand based on the book?
Oh, Nomadland.
Yeah, so there's like people who had to do that sort of thing, but then there's a lot of people now who like, especially some very young people, I think, who kind of want to drop out.
They all have YouTube channels
and Instagram accounts and probably TikToks and all that stuff. So it's interesting to watch this movie and think about that sort of thread of culture now. Yeah.
Well, and it tells you something like the difference between why the characters in Lost in America are doing it and why these young people are doing it today. I mean, it's interesting. it seems like the people who are doing it today are doing it to have successful brands and YouTube channels.
That would be the opposite of
it's content creation, right? Which is almost the opposite of really dropping out. If you're having to stay if you're trying to stay plugged into social media with every breath of your day.
Whereas
are you really dropping out? I don't know.
No. Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, it's if you are interested in that, I don't know, cultural mindset, it might be interesting to watch this movie.
Yeah. So let's talk about some unsung gems, movies that we really love and that we think people should see.
Well, I mean, you've mentioned some of the ones that I put on my list already, things like Lost in America and Gotcha and Brazil. But I think one that's probably top of both of our lists is Into the Night.
Well, it's one of my favorite movies, period.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
One of mine, too. I love that movie. And I think it's a hidden
you
gem.
Explain it, because I doubt if most people have not heard of that movie, I'm guessing.
Explaining Into the Night. Well, it's a movie by John Landis. He's the director. And it's about a guy like he's an engineer in Los Angeles. He's just sort of an everyman. It's played by Jeff Goldblum, which I guess you wouldn't think of necessarily as an everyman these days, but he's our everyman.
Every weirdo.
But he's not that weird in this movie. Anyway, he can't sleep, and he's feeling kind of oppressed by his life and can't really figure out why. One day he finds out that his wife is cheating on him, and he takes a nighttime drive because he's an insomniac, doesn't know what to do with himself. His life is crushing him, and he drives to the airport, and all of a sudden, he's parked in the parking lot, and all of a sudden, basically Michelle Pfeiffer drops into his life in sort of she's a damsel in distress in wacky fashion, and it kind of goes from there. I don't know what else should we say. There's so much to say about.
It's a caper. It's a tone poem. It's a mood piece. It's a look at nocturnal Los Angeles in the 80s. It has this its plot is almost secondary to what's great about it, which is the feel of it, the vibe of it. It's just one of the most sort of unique feeling movies, and it has this elegance and this beauty because it takes place all over LA. You see every neighborhood in Los Angeles in this movie, and they're all empty, which is true, which is what happens in LA. Unlike a lot of cities, like massive portions of LA just empty out overnight. And so the city feels really empty except for our characters who are running around at 4 a.m. in the middle of this jewel caper, essentially, is what it turns out to be. Just meeting some of the weirdest cast of weirdos, the kind of people that are up in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Well, and you wonder, is this a dream? Is it real? It's very, very dreamlike, beautifully shot. And it all takes place in one night in LA.
It has this very evocative score by B.B. King. And it was part of a cycle of films that was later named by an academic to be the Suburban Nightmare Cycle, which was movies about sort of upscale yuppies who usually all in one night have some kind of nightmarish adventure that pulls them out of their comfort zone, where they're forced to deal with characters from outside of their socioeconomic class. And so it's movies like Into the Night and the East Coast sister of this film, the movie that always gets mentioned in the same breath as Into the Night, which is Martin Scorsese's After Hours.
Yeah, also so great.
And then Steve DeJarnet's Miracle Mile. Blind Date, which is a Blake Edwards movie with Bruce Willis. I'm missing a big one. What are the other ones?
Yeah, there's one more we're missing.
We did a cycle of these.
I was going to...
There's a fourth one we did on the Dodge movie podcast with our friends.
Oh, it's Something
Mike
Wild.
And Christy Dodge. Yeah, Something Wild, the Jonathan Demme movie with Melanie Griffith and Jeff Daniels.
Yeah, I was going to put in a plug. We guested on our friends, the Dodge movie podcast, and talked about all of or at least 4 of the yuppie nightmare cycle movies. We do a whole episode on Into the Night with the Dodges.
Yeah. So go back and listen to that.
Yeah, go back in their archives and listen to that. You'll hear us talking all about it. Fantastic movie. Yeah. You should see
So
it.
Other unsung gems. I had a fantasy film called Lady Hawk.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I think I had that in my key films, but I think it's because I love it so much.
Yeah, well, it wasn't successful when it came out. So I don't know if we could call it a key film of that year, but it's certainly since become a cult classic.
I love that movie.
It's directed by Richard Donner, produced by his wife, Lauren Schuler. Stars Matthew Broderick. And Rutger Hauer and never more beautiful Michelle Pfeiffer.
It's a big Michelle Pfeiffer year.
It was a big Michelle Pfeiffer year. Into the Night and Lady Hawk. Neither of which were successful though. No.
She is luminous in both of them though.
Yeah, but she was never more beautiful than in those two movies. I would say. It's just a heartbreaking love story that sounds, when you describe it to somebody, you can see why they might roll their eyes, but if you watch it and see the seriousness with which it's taken by the filmmakers, like, it's hard to not get swept up in it. I mean, I guess it wouldn't be. You might be able, if you have a low tolerance for corn, which this movie can be. It can be a little corny.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, look, I have a high tolerance. I love this movie.
I do. I do too. I mean, I discovered it as a kid and fell for it. Totally. So it's hard to have perspective on it.
Well, and one thing, I mean, its source material, so to speak, or at least the premise, comes from a very old medieval tradition of stories, like where people would turn into animals and fall in love. So it comes from a very old. Literate medieval, or maybe not literate.
So the premise is it's Rutger Hauer is a knight who turns into a wolf. He and his romantic love have been cursed.
Yes. And
the curse is that he turns into a wolf at night, and at night she is human, she is a woman, and then during the day she turns into a hawk, hence the title.
Lady Hawk.
So they're always together, but they can never really be together as humans. So. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's them trying to break the curse with the help of Matthew Broderick, who is completely out of place in this movie. He seems like he just came in on a subway train to this movie that's set in like England 400 years ago.
Yeah. I don't know, him in an old period piece like that. It's an interesting choice, but
and it's somehow incredibly charming, and he totally works. Yeah.
Look, he's Matthew Broderick.
It also has one of the most oddball. What's the word I'm trying to think of when something doesn't match?
Oh, the score.
The score,
Oh, I know what you mean.
There's a word for this. Starts with an A. Anachronistic? Is that the word I'm looking for?
It's an anachronistic score. That's true. Yeah.
It's Alan Parsons of the Alan Parsons Project wrote a synth score for this movie that looks like it should have a gigantic symphonic score.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just a very traditional classical
It's very strange,
score.
And yet also somehow really works. Yeah,
I love that score.
It's odd.
Yeah, it's great. I just love Lady Hawk.
Another unsung gem I want to mention was Emerald Forest.
Yeah, that's on my list too.
Which is a movie based on a true story of a man whose little son was stolen by a tribe in the Amazon while the man was down there with his family building a new dam. And he spent many years searching for the kid. And I don't think he ever found him in real life, but in the movie, he finds him, and he's a teenager. So he finds him like a decade later. And he is, the kid has been fully kind of,
assimilated
into the tribe. And, it's just a very interesting, it's John Borman, who always swings for the fences. He never makes he doesn't make subtle movies. And so this is another movie where I could see how some people might have a negative reaction to it, but I just really like it. Weirdly, I saw this and Rambo, First Blood Part 2, like in back-to-back nights. I remember this in Hawaii.
Oh,
My dad's a pharmacist. We used to go to these pharmaceutical conventions every year, and they had one in Hawaii. It was my first time ever going to Hawaii. I was a really little kid. And some of my family, that is to say, like my teenage cousin, who was like who I just idolized because he was like a rock and roll guy.
Yeah.
He would disappear every night into the Honolulu nightclub scene.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I would just go to the movies with my parents,
Right.
who are, who I love to death, but they're squares. And so we were
come on, you would have gone to probably would have wanted to go to the movies anyway.
Yeah, it's not, and it's like, what else are you going to do with a little kid, right?
But
I remember seeing Rambo, which my parents were a little like, ooh, that was awfully violent for our son. And then we saw Emerald Forest, which is full of, bare-chested women because it's about a tribe.
A tribe, yeah.
In the Amazon, there's a ton of, it's wall-to-wall nudity. None of it is sexual at all. It's like National Geographic.
But yeah. But it's also pretty violent.
It is, but I also remember that my parents being like, wow, there's a lot of breasts in this movie.
Yeah, again, they're not at all salacious.
These are a couple of R-rated films for my my young eyes.
Yeah, that's so funny.
I saw my first film on an airplane on that trip.
Is that right? Do you remember what it was?
I do. It was 2 movies.
Okay.
One was Beverly Hills Cop, which my parents almost didn't let me watch because they thought all the profanity was going to still be in it. And I was like, come on, this is a 15-hour plane ride.
Let me watch.
And
Beverly
so they're
Hills
like,
Cop.
all right. And of course, they had edited out all the profanity because it was an airplane version. And the other movie was The Mean Season.
Oh.
With Kurt Russell, Mariel Hemingway, which I actually really like. And it came out this year. It came out in February 1985. So... It's a good B movie thriller about a journalist who is contacted by a serial killer, and it's set in Florida during the hurricane season, and the finale is set in the middle of a hurricane. Yeah. It's just a pretty cool, cool B movie, kind of histrionic but fun anyway. And if you like Kurt Russell, it's just a great Kurt Russell hero performance, which he's great at.
You were like, what, 10 or 11? So, wow.
Something like
These
that.
are some things this is just another really interesting part, I think, that we always forget about of 80s film consumption was that if you went on a plane, there was a movie and pretty much everyone would watch it or kind of had to watch it. Like you might not put in the earphones that you were given.
But they showed it on a big screen at the front of the cabin.
You couldn't avoid the visuals. Yeah.
And you didn't have any choice. It was like one movie or 2 movies maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I remember seeing Frantic on a plane when I was very little.
What a weird movie to see on a plane.
It was pretty, and I was, I don't know, I was super young.
Yeah.
So it was very weird to me. I've seen it since.
That's funny.
Like it, but it was, I have a distinct memory of seeing Frantic on a plane.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any other unsung gems, or should I move on to B movies?
Yeah, we hit all my unsung gems,
okay, cool.
I believe. Yeah.
I'm going to race through a few B movies. There were some good B movies that came out this year. Life Force.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a Canon Films classic. It was Tobe Hooper, the director of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was given a massive budget. I think the biggest budget that Canon Films had allocated somebody at that time.
Good Lord.
It's like a $25 million budget. And he was making a movie. It was during production. It was called Vampires from Space. Or Space Vampires, maybe?
Canon.
I think maybe it was just called The Space Vampires.
I don't know.
Anyway, much better title because that's essentially what it is about.
Yep.
It's Patrick Stewart and a bunch of like old British actors, and it's essentially like aliens come down and they turn everybody into London into zombies, and it's really pretty incoherent, but it's so big and gaudy and like bizarre that it's hard to not kind of be awed by it while you're watching it if you like this kind of movie, which is the caveat that I give to every time I recommend these B movies.
Yeah.
Mean Season, which I mentioned. Code of Silence, which is generally considered the highest quality movie that Chuck Norris made.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
It's the only movie that Chuck Norris made, I think, in this era that got good reviews from critics. I think Ebert might have even put it on his 10 best.
Whoa.
It's about a Chicago cop who is fighting corruption within the police force. Mm-hmm. Has a great action sequence on top of the L train where Chuck's fighting a guy and they fall off the L train into the Chicago River.
I love an on top of a train fight. Yeah. I think those are always great.
It was directed by Andrew Davis, who went on to make Under Siege and The Fugitive and other great action movies.
That makes
The Package.
So much sense.
Just a really great Chicago action director.
Yeah.
Cat's Eye. Which is an anthology movie of Stephen King stories. Mm-hmm. Drew Barrymore is in one of them, and she was on the poster. She's kind of the big name in it. Yep. But the stories are all sourced from Night Shift, I think, his collection of short stories. And it's fun. Like it's like any anthology movie. Some of the some of the pieces are better than others, but but on the whole, I actually, think it's got a high ratio of like good to not so good.
Is this the one with the smoking clinic in it?
It is, yeah. James Woods,
yeah.
It's a Quitters Inc. is the name of it.
Yeah.
He goes to this company to get them to. They're supposed to teach you how to quit smoking, and the way they do that, it turns out they're run by the mob. And the way they do that is by kidnapping your wife and torturing her in front of you until you agree to stop smoking.
Yeah. And if you go back, they'll like do it. I don't know. They ratchet up the
it gets
or
intense.
whatever. Yeah, it's pretty scary.
And then the last one is The Company of Wolves, which is a very strange movie by Neil Jordan, the Irish filmmaker that made The Crying Game and other movies, based around the Red Riding Hood story. So Angela Lansbury plays the grandmother. And it's just this very kind of like bizarre, hypersexualized version of the Little Red Riding Hood story. Very strange movie. And then finally, I have a few in the what I call so bad it's good category.
Yeah, I've got a couple that I have a sense are probably the same.
I think some of them will be on the same list. So why don't you tell me some of yours?
Oh, well, let's start with rappin'.
Rappin', yes. That's not rapping.
No, rappin' with an N apostrophe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is this a canon film?
Oh, hell yeah.
Okay. It must be a canon film.
Yeah. I mean, it is because it's clearly a rip-off or a continuance of Breakin', right?
Yeah, I mean, it's
is
in the
a canon
movie.
movie.
It's got the same DNA.
It clearly only exists because somebody saw the success of Breakin' and went, the kids like breakdancing. I hear they also like this new thing called rapping. Let's make one called Rappin'.
Yeah.
Same director as Breakin', in fact.
Is it? Wait, who's the director?
His name is Joel Silberg. Okay. He's a Israeli director, like a friend of the guy, the Golan and Globus, the guys that ran Canon.
I always think of Sam the Sham first, but I didn't think this was him.
Sam first. But he directed Breakin' 2.
Right.
Breakin' 1 was Joel Silberg.
Right. Yeah, rapping, I believe, is Mario Van Peebles.
Mario Van Peebles, clearly not a rapper, a fine actor, but not, and a decent director, but not a rapper, although he raps all the way through this movie.
Well, it's called rapping. Pretty much many of the actors have to rap in this movie, as I recall.
Yeah. It's just this very funny, like G-rated version of The Hood.
Well,
they're rapping songs about like eating too many snacks.
But he's playing basically Robin Hood, and they call him Rappin' Hood, I believe,
Hood,
don't they? Yeah, isn't that the whole...
He's trying to save the block from evil developers.
Yeah.
What else you got?
Jim Cotta. Yeah.
Gymkata for people that just went, what did she say? It's not about a guy named James Cotta. It's Jim Cotta. Gymkata.
I'm going to throw to you to explain Jim Cotta because I don't think I have a prayer.
Jim Cotta is the ultimate martial art because it's a combination of... I'm just telling you what the movie says.
I know.
So the ultimate martial art is a combination of gymnastics and karate. And the filmmakers got Kurt Thomas, who was a Olympic gymnast in his only acting performance. We're all the better for it. That career ending as soon as it began.
See the movie, you'll know why. Yeah.
To describe the plot of this movie is pointless. It is an insane plot, and so it would be fun to do that for you, but I would instead not rob you of the experience of seeing it for yourself.
Enjoy the journey.
Only to say that no scene seems remotely connected to the scene that comes before it. The movie takes more left turns than you can imagine, and it is just a bizarre movie. He's essentially a secret agent who goes into this foreign country to compete in this kind of... Enter the dragon kind of combat.
It's like a fight not a fight to the death, but it's kind of
like an obstacle
stakes.
course meets a fight to the death kind of situation. And but the central conceit of the film is that he's using his gymnast skills to move through it.
His gym
skills. He keeps finding things like just random things in the street that look like pommel horses because those exist, and then he uses them to get up and to pommel horse, and of course people run up to attack him, and he kicks them as he pommel horses around. The movie is just nonstop that. It's him using gymnastic skills to kick people's butts.
Isn't he also supposed to be kind of avenging his father to some degree because his father supposedly died?
As I said, there were so many.
There's a lot going on.
There's so many subplots. Yeah. There's something to do with a satellite.
Oh my God, I'd forgotten the satellite.
There's a princess. There's overthrowing a corrupt government in a foreign country that doesn't really exist.
I mean, just go watch it.
Yeah, it is 80 some minutes of bliss.
If you like what we just described.
Yeah, so bad it's good. What else did you have?
I mean, those were the two big ones for me. I think you've probably seen more of the B movies.
I have three more.
Go for it.
Moving Violations, which is a blatant ripoff of Police Academy, starring John Murray, who is one of Bill Murray's brothers.
Oh.
And Jennifer Tilly.
Oh, my.
And is juvenile beyond belief, but kind of funny if
even more
you
than
are
Police
a juvenile,
Academy.
Which is what I was in the 80s when I saw this movie. And so I thought it was hilarious.
That was great. Okay.
Red Sonja.
Ah, yes. One of your faves.
Which was supposed to be another Conan movie, but there's something to do with the rights involved in that, and they couldn't use the Conan name. So instead, Arnold plays a character called Cronin or something like that. It's something that's not far off.
Conan.
Yeah, but it was the kind of starring debut of Brigitte Nielsen.
Right.
And it's essentially, a swords and sorcery movie. It's very cartoony. It's more in the vein of Conan the Destroyer than Conan the Barbarian. It's just a real goofy movie. Ernie Reyes Jr. plays a prince in it. You remember him?
Oh, my God, yes. The Last Electric Night,
Yeah,
I
The
believe.
Last Electric Night.
Yeah, I love him.
He was also in The Last Dragon this year.
Oh, yes.
So it was a big Ernie Reyes Jr.
I was a big fan of Sidekicks, which he was in on TV. Maybe at this time. I don't know what year that was, but I love that.
Yeah, it was right around that time because he was a kid.
Yeah.
And then finally, Perfect.
Oh, sure.
Which is hilariously named because it's definitely not that.
Oh, no.
It is
You're setting yourself up with that title, aren't you?
Yeah. I think it's a James Brooks movie, believe it or not. Wow. Yeah, which is wild. But it's,
wild.
No, Bridges. Sorry, James Bridges.
Oh.
Not the same thing.
No.
But it's about it comes out of the gym, what do they call it? The gym jazzercise.
The aerobics craze?
Yeah, the aerobics craze. That kind of
jazzercise, maybe you're thinking of.
Yeah. That whole Jane Fonda's workout.
Yeah, the legwarmers.
But it wasn't just aerobics. It was like aerobics and dancing.
Well, you're
together.
thinking jazzercise, I think, which is what that was.
So anyway, it's based on an actual Rolling Stone article that was like an expose of the gymnastics health clubs of LA and how they were essentially meat markets, like pickup singles bars. And the way they turned this into a movie was to make the John Travolta, the character, the guy who wrote that article. So instead of just turning that article into a movie, they turned the writing of that article into a movie. Oh. And Jamie Lee Curtis plays the aerobics instructor, and they have kind of a relationship, and it is, it's really bad. And by really bad, I mean super fun.
So bad, it's good. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's the movie, or preparing for that movie, I think is when Jamie Lee Curtis met Christopher Guest. I think she was preparing for Perfect or in the middle of shooting it or whatever. But
it was around that time, for sure.
I just remember her talking about it. Yeah.
Okay, rewindable moments. Let's wrap up with some of our favorite scenes from some of these movies.
I mean, I think there's some really good ones this
Oh my God,
year.
There's some great ones, yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you got?
Oh, I have lots of things.
I'll interrupt you if I have one as well from the same movie.
Well, I mean, just going back to our So Bad It's Good, there's some little kids who sing a song and rap in that I just think are adorable. I can't remember the name of the song now, but it's
a very cute scene.
It's really cute.
Yeah,
it's such a cute scene.
four 7-year-olds doing kind of a 80s version of the Temptations.
Yeah, they're not even rapping; they're singing.
Yeah, it's very cute,
and they're singing to a little girl, and it's super cute. I'm sorry, I had to bring that one.
Yeah,
up.
it's a great scene.
Yeah.
What else? Is that it? Is that your only scene? So I have one favorite scene from 1985, and it's these little kids in rapping.
I mean, I guess I thought we were going to go back and forth, but We didn't really talk about Girls Just Want to Have Fun, but the wonderful dance competition at the end of Girls Just Want to Have Fun is so much fun.
And any outfit that Helen Hunt wears in that movie.
I mean, any outfit anyone wears, but specifically Helen Hunt. Actually, the audition scene is super fun too. Yeah, I like that a lot. Sarah Jessica. Yep. Speaking of dance scenes, the dance scene in The Breakfast Club. I mean, everyone knows that one, but that's endlessly rewindable. Yep. I also really like.
Was on my list.
I don't remember exactly the part of the movie, but doesn't Molly Ringwald talk about her like sushi lunch in The Breakfast Club? And I just remember loving that and thinking that was hilarious.
She doesn't just talk about it. She like pulls it out to eat it.
Yeah, and, I just remember thinking that was great.
And Bender. Judd Nelson,
right?
He's giving her a hard time, and she goes, "Can I just eat?" And he goes, "I don't know, but try."
I just love that part. It's a small part of The Breakfast Club that and there's so much in The Breakfast Club, right? To rewind. You must have Breakfast Club rewindable moments.
Just that dance scene. I mean, there's there's a million scenes in that movie, but that's the one that immediately leaps to mind.
I love the end of Lady Hawk.
Yeah, I put the beginning. I love Matthew Broderick's escape from the prison.
That's very good too. Yeah. I mean, I like some romance, so the end of Lady Hawk
it's quite lovely.
Biking around town in the Goonies.
Yep, I had the water slide / revelation of the pirate ship.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, come on, there's so much in the Goonies that you'd want to rewind. There's a lot I love in Into the Night, of course. I suspect you'll want to talk about the opening scene, which is really great. Fantastic. But I also really love the part where Jeff Goldblum enters sort of the empty, fancy apartment into the night, and he's like searching around the apartment, and it's just so...
Yeah. It's a hotel room.
It's a hotel room, sorry.
Yeah, but it's this very creepy, weird
moody
scene. There's Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is playing on all the TVs in the different rooms.
And there's this very fancy, elaborate meal laid out that looks like it's just been abandoned. I mean, I love it.
Yeah.
I also love when David Bowie shows up in Into the Night.
The opening credits of Into the Night are like probably my favorite opening. Not probably, they are my favorite opening credits of any movie ever.
They're wonderful.
Just incredibly haunting, evocative, beautiful montage of nocturnal Los Angeles. They're amazing. Kind of like, they remind me a little of the opening credits of the TV show Moonlighting. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that? Yeah. Just is very interesting. That movie also has my favorite shot, which is the airplane going over the bridge at LAX and Jeff Goldblum's little car going into the tunnel right underneath it. Such an amazing shot.
One of my favorite shots in that movie is just seeing their house, and their house is like located underneath an overpass, basically.
Yep,
amazing.
under a freeway overpass. Yeah,
that's crazy.
It's so
that's
great.
So great. I think the only other thing I really have here is the opening of Gotcha, where they're actually playing the game.
Yeah, I had that too. The opening and the closing.
The closing's
where
also
you see
fantastic.
all of those, all the stuff he was doing in the opening kind of comes back to play at the end. Like the skills he learned at playing that game help him to outwit the spies, the real spies at the end of the movie.
I think some of our favorite movies of that year just have really great bookends, openings and closings. Turns out.
Yeah. So I had a few more.
Yeah.
I had the scene in Cocoon where the old guys are first start to feel the energy of the swimming pool with the alien eggs, and they're like doing high dives and flips and
Wonderful.
Stuff. Such a funny scene.
Yeah.
The Golden Gate Bridge fight in View to a Kill, but also the Eiffel Tower escape where Grace Jones jumps off the Eiffel Tower.
Absolutely. I meant to put that down, and I don't know why I didn't.
Yeah, that scene is wild.
That's so great.
The barn raising scene in Witness is really lovely.
Why didn't I think
the
of
fight
that?
on top of the L train, as I mentioned in Code of Silence.
Yeah.
The finale of Mean Season, which is a fight in the middle of a hurricane, which is pretty cool.
Always good.
It's just hard to beat it. Equalizer 2 ends in the middle of a hurricane.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
If you want to amp up your action finale, just throw in a hurricane.
Put it in a hurricane. Yeah. It's always good.
And then the last one I had, I mean, I hate to mention it because I have to really explain it if I'm going to mention it. Is the Village of the Crazies.
So I also had this, but I wasn't sure if you wanted to talk about the Village of the Crazies and Jim Cotta.
So that's not our name for it. I know that's on PC, but that's what they call it in the movie.
That is what they call it in the movie.
So as part of the kind of fighting obstacle course that our hero has to go through at the end of Gymkata, he has to navigate through what they call the Village of the Crazies, which is this walled off ancient kind of Eastern European village that's been walled off by big stone walls. And it's where this country, it's where they throw all of their mentally
not at all problematic
ill
or
people. And,
troublesome.
They put them all in this village and, so he has to go through there, and it's just... It's just indescribable what you'll see in that sequence. It is just one,
it's a lot.
for lack of a better word, crazy encounter after another.
It's absurdities galore. I mean, this is, I believe, where the pommel horse shows up, right? There's
it's the
for some reason, a pommel horse
in
the middle of the
village,
and he uses it to his advantage. Yeah, it's real wild.
Yeah.
Real wild.
So how appropriate in a part of the year that brought us such classics as Prizzi's Honor, Purple Rose of Cairo, Brazil, Witness, Blood Simple, The Breakfast Club, that we end by talking about Gymkata.
Well,
that's what separates this podcast from all those other film-related podcasts that don't have the courage to talk about the real cinema of movies like Gymkata. All right, folks, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the back half of 1985.
All right, see you then. You've been listening to The Long Rewind. The program is produced by Dustin Morrow and hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli. If you enjoy the show, please consider hitting the subscribe button, leave us a good review on your podcast app, and tell your friends about the program. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.